Good morning, everyone. I believe we have a full complement of panel and staff. I'd like to get this meeting underway. To that end, I'll begin with a few short remarks. Good morning and welcome to this online hearing of the Committee of Adjustment of the City of Ottawa under the Planning Act. This video conference is also live streaming on YouTube. With me are my fellow panel members, Jocelyn Chandler, Stephen Lewis, Terrence Otto, and Martin Vervoort. My name is Fabian Poulin, and I will be chairing this hearing today. The procedure for this hearing will be as follows. Listed on the agenda and appearing on the screen are applications we will hear today. For the sake of efficiency, the committee may deal with agenda items in a different order. Committee members have reviewed the planning reports and any written submissions in support or in opposition to each of the applications. Today, we will hear oral submissions from interested parties. As part of the statutory public notification requirements, each applicant was required to post a sign on the property and file a statutory declaration confirming the sign posting. This declaration must be on file today before we hear the application. Without it, I may have to adjourn the application or administer an oath if necessary. Can the coordinator confirm that we have received all statutory declarations?
No, we have not received all statutory declarations, so you'll have to issue those today, Chair.
Thank you very much. The committee may ask for a brief presentation on the application, followed by questions from members and submissions from the public. Please address your comments to the chair, starting with your name and spelling it if necessary, and your municipal address for the record. The committee limits presentations to 5 minutes. Any exceptions will be at the discretion of the chair. And finally, before we begin, we have just one item to address today. Does any member present need to declare an interest in any of the applications that are before us today or that are on the agenda of another committee panel?
I do. I have 2 to declare. The first is for panel 2, application at 3345-3555 Boris Akane. That's Severance B-00093. And for this panel, the address being 2800 Huntley Road. That's minor variance application A-00190.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. We'll now hear the application scheduled for this hearing and deal firstly with any items that may be adjourned. Is there anyone present who wishes to request an adjournment of one of the applications scheduled for this hearing? I believe we have application number 5. Is there someone representing application number 5? Or Mr. Walker, I believe you are looking to have this application adjourned.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. That is correct. The department is requesting an adjournment of the application because the property to be severed is part of the sand and gravel resource area, and the applicant would need to demonstrate that the severed portion is not a part of the extraction zone as per the license that was registered with the ministry. Also, the area to be severed is part of the floodplain overlay, and so the applicant will need to provide a rationale for including that area in the line adjustment.
Thank you. Mr. Simmons, do you agree with this adjournment request?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have had a discussion with Mr. Walker and also received his submission. We began working on this late last week when we got his submission, and we would like an adjournment to the next available hearing date if possible, because I think we expect to be able to address it within 2 weeks.
Okay. Do we have room on our agenda next time? I believe we only have 4 applications, so I don't think it should be difficult. Madam Deputy Secretary, are we good with October 21?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So we'll adjourn this application to October 21, where we'll hear your application in full.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just confirm that my client's statutory declaration did in fact make its way into the record this morning? I submitted it at 8:30 or 8 o'clock or something.
Madam Coordinator?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we did receive it. If the application is adjourned, we'll just keep it on file for next time.
Perfect.
Very
Thank you
good.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. You're adjourned for this meeting.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Now we'll move on to application number 1.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes.
think we should confirm from the members that they're agreeable to the adjournment, just for formality's sake.
All right. All in favor to adjourn the application to October 27? All in favor, please raise your hand. The application is adjourned to October 21. Now on to application number 1. Is Mr. Hayward available? Mr. Hayward, are you here? This is having to do with 1816 River Road. Is there someone representing that?
Yes, I put in a note. It's Mr. Simmons and Mr. Haywood from Chris Simmons' computer.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. I have to administer an oath because we do not have an application, a statutory declaration on file. Are you prepared to take that oath now?
Yes.
Okay.
Scott
Do you
Hayward.
pardon me?
Sorry.
What's your name?
Continue. Sorry.
All right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
Yes, I do.
And that's Mr. Simmons?
This is Mr. Hayward.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear as well, Mr. Simmons?
Sir, I wasn't, it was Mr. Haywood that put up the sign.
Okay,
So he's swearing it.
perfect. Okay, can we have a brief description then, Mr. Hayward, on your application today, or
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
This is Chris Simmons. And I've got some visuals here. I wanted to just overall describe the position of the project. The left-hand side of the screen is the Rideau River, and the right-hand side is River Road. It's a long property with an existing house adjacent to the river end. One of the strange things about the survey is that the location of the building is referenced to the foundation, and the actual house extends out sometimes 3 feet beyond that foundation. We have clarified the exact dimensions on our site plans and so on. So I don't know if that has created some confusion on the part of some people reading the plans. Next, please. So this is a shot of the front of the house. It's a raised bungalow with 3 garage doors. To the left is the adjacent house. Next shot, please. It's just another view showing you where that house is relative to the property of my client. Next, please. That's looking the other direction along the house on the road side. I don't know if you can catch that the edge of the house is beyond the stone-clad foundation by a couple of feet there. Next shot, please. That's just another general shot of the road side of the house. Next, please. And that's a shot of the back of the house. You can see it is very much a bungalow. Adjacent houses to the right of the screen and beyond that are both 2-story houses. And our general intention is to change the roof shape and add a partial 2nd floor on the house. Next shot, please. I think this is the most important illustration. there's an existing deck, which is 15 meters from the normal water's edge. My understanding is from the Conservation Authority's point of view and the city's point of view, therefore, that the 15-meter setback is measured to the deck and the existing house does not comply. We understand that the Conservation Authority would normally want 15 meters from the floodplain contour, and the floodplain contour and the 15-meter setback are shown in green lines. Now then there's a pink line which represents the City of Ottawa bylaw requirement of a 30-meter setback from the normal water's edge. So all of the work that we are doing between that pink line and the normal water's edge requires a variance. So for instance, on the to create the new second floor addition, which is shown in the reddish hatched area, needs the variance. Even the little pop out from the living room end towards the street at the top of the screen of the existing building requires a variance. And even on the existing building, we have a very low slope roof with no insulation in it. And so we're proposing to change the roof profile to allow a good insulated amount of insulation on the roof and a better slope. And so even just changing the roof trusses requires the variance. And the other thing is that so that was the first variance that's required. The second variance is along the south property line, which is at the bottom of the screen. The existing garage extends to, at its closest point, to roughly 2 meters from the property line, whereas the bylaw requires 4.5 meters. Now, in an effort to do this all very economically, we're proposing to reuse the current foundations and build the proposed addition above the current house and garage, extruding them upwards to put a second floor on. And then, so that means that when we put the second floor above the garage, we need a variance because we're too close to the property line. Instead of being 4.5 meters, we're 2 meters. And then, same thing on the third variance is on the north side. We're showing 2.05 meters from the corner of the proposed little extension. Now, I understand that there was a typo in the public notice saying that we required 2.15 meters. And we have been told by the committee secretary or one of the members of the administration that at this hearing, we can therefore only ask for 2.15. And I've talked to my client, and rather than delay our hearing today, they would rather decrease the width of that proposed extension so that the variance we're asking for is only for 2.15. And we will be resubmitting plans to that effect. So just to explain a little bit more, or should I stop and receive questions at this point, Mr. Chair?
Only if you think you have more to add that'll help with your application. Otherwise, we'll proceed on.
I have more to add, so
Okay.
I will just show you, if you go to the next shot. So at the top is the roadside elevation. At the bottom is the current riverside elevation. And I will point out that, I mean, the building is very low and well below the height limit, which is around 11 meters or something. And you can see that the garage from the riverside has a garage door, which is being kept. And it is actually quite a tall tall structure that's there right now in the garage. It's got a monopitch roof on it. And the next shot, if you wouldn't mind, illustrates the side elevations. The top one is the north elevation, which has very straightforward. And then the one below it is the existing south elevation, which faces to an adjacent house. And you can also see a cross section. Now the proposed addition will sit above the garage, not up way high, but fairly low. So it's not really a full second story that we're adding, but in a sense, a partial second story. It looks like the second story from the street. Next shot, please. And this is the revised elevation from the street. And the dashed black lines represent the profile of the existing house. Go ahead to the next shot. And this is the revised profile of the rear. Whoop, go back one, please. And you can see on the right-hand side, the black dashed line above the garage door represents the current height, and then the new roof above it. And you can see that the midpoint height of the roof is well below, over 3.5 meters below the maximum building height for the zoning bylaw. And we're keeping the existing footprint. Move on, please. And that is the revised north elevation. You can see the outline of the existing house, and you can see how we have placed, we've changed the profile of the roof over the near portion of it, and we've added the second floor sort of centered on the whole volume of the house further back. Go ahead, please. All right. Okay. I have, I think at this point, I've essentially described the project to my satisfaction. I do have some slides in preparation for a couple of comments that I received, but in the essence, for preservation of time constraints, I propose to leave off my presentation and just come back to answer any questions that are posed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Mr. Walker, can you please give us some comments for the city and PED? Oh, I'm sorry, it's Anissa, Miss McAlpine, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I should start by indicating that I have not had the chance to review any of the information that was provided here today by Mr. Simmons. I have reviewed what was circulated. And so there were 3 minor variances requested, and the department has different positions and concerns with each of them. So I will commence by iterating my comment on the first minor variance requested, which was, as I understood it, to permit a reduced setback to the existing deck, as that was what was indicated in the notice, as well as the 15-meter setback described in the notice was what was drawn on the plan. And in my comment, you will see that I indicated that the committee should not be issuing minor variances for existing structures. As I understand it, the deck predates zoning bylaw 2008-250, and it was my understanding that the item should be crossed off.
So we'll remove that condition. Now, we'll remove that.
It is now more. Yes.
We'll remove that particular, I guess, request or for that minor variance.
However, it appears to be that was not the intention of the applicant, and in that they are seeking a minor variance for the second story construction. It is my opinion that they do need a minor variance. However, I have not provided analysis and have not prepared a comment on that matter. I should further iterate or remind committee that our policies are that we require 30-meter setback from the normal high water mark of any watercourse and 15 meters to the top of bank of any watercourse. Neither of those features have been identified on the plans provided. So it would be my recommendation that that item not be considered by committee until those features are properly identified and setbacks from those features are provided. So that's the first minor variance. Respecting the second and third minor variance, so those are for the southerly and northerly interior side yard setbacks. I have no concerns respecting a reduced southerly interior side yard setback as proposed. Respecting the northerly interior side yard setback, I note that there was the typo. As well, I note that there is a tree in close proximity to the foundation of the structure that was not identified on the site plan provided. It is my concern that the reduced interior side yard setback may prove detrimental to that tree, which is within the 4.5 meter expected side yard setback, and any further encroachment towards that tree could prove detrimental to it, and therefore I have concerns for the tree. I also have concerns given the proximity of the existing structure to both lot lines, that further encroachment in the northerly direction may make access to the rear yard as well as to the river shore challenging, and should equipment at any point be needed to access the rear yard, that could prove challenging. So I have some concerns respecting the northerly interior side yard setback being reduced. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you have any response to any of those comments, Mr. Simmons?
Yes, I certainly do. If you could, if we could go to the diagrams, I understand we're in troubling, or difficult times with COVID, but we have explained the scope of the work that we're undertaking to several members of the planning department at various times. And we're a little bit aghast that they didn't receive all the plans, which clearly show the full scope of the work. We've also, at a number of times, presented all these diagrams to a representative of the planning department to make sure they've reviewed the application before it went in. We've also taken great pains to discuss the application with the Conservation Authority before any application or design work was done. So I'm disappointed on behalf of my client that a thorough review and questioning hasn't taken place. But if we could look at the diagrams, I would like to just go to screen share if someone could do that, and I could still talk to them perhaps. Could you flip back to the colored in site plan? We provided this to them, did we not? Mm-hmm. There. So this diagram was provided in the application, and it clearly illustrates where the floodplain is and the top of bank, which is at the top of bank. There is a bank right there in the form of a retaining wall. And we clearly illustrated in the green setback line where the 15 meters occurred. And we clearly illustrated where the 30 meters line occurs. And so this has been in with the committee since day one. In fact, they lost the first one and resubmitted it, and they had it all over again. So this has been in possession of the committee. Now, I don't want to have a partial approval here. If the only way that the committee can approve this is to defer and let Ms. McAlpine review these documents and talk to us about it, we'll have to do that. But I just want to point out we've clearly got all this stuff in your hands. Could we flip through a little bit further to where we were before? Yes. So just go on to the next slide, please. All right. So what I want to just illustrate here is the location of the tree, which Ms. McAlpine was concerned about, Mr. Chair. The new addition that we're proposing does not have foundations. It cantilevers towards the tree. The distance to the tree trunk at its closest point is going to be 2.4 meters. It's currently 3.3. And there are no lower branches in that area. The amount of the distance at the side of the house right now is about 2.3 meters. And we're proposing to add new siding and insulation on the outside of the existing house. And also because of the angle of the house, we'll lose a couple more inches as we project forward. So really only talking about, 0.15, 0.2 meters, 6 or 8 inches increase encroachment at the side. It's plenty of room to get a bobcat through. It's not enough to get a large truck through. However, there is a drive-through garage on the property, which is going to be retained. Not only that, there is no house to the north. And my clients are certainly currently on friendly terms with the neighbors to the north. And there's plenty of access through there at that point. So I don't think the loss of, 0.15 meters, 6 inches is a make or break deal on this thing. You'd currently have to take down all the fencing that exists along that side to get vehicles through and so on. But I don't think it's necessary. If you could flip to the next picture, please. That's a shot showing the location of the tree and the fence and the property line. There is a tree on the neighbor's property, which constrains things. You can see that there's no low branches on this tree. We're not proposing to dig around it in any way. So I don't think we're endangering the tree. Next shot, please. All right, so I think you can go back. That is my response to Ms. McAlpine's comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. The conservation partners, can I ask the conservation partners if they have any comments?
Through the chair, yes, the applicant had approached us prior to submitting the application we reviewed. As detailed by Mr. Simmons, the application itself, there's the floodplain that encroaches to the property, but not beyond the retaining wall. The 15 meters that was referred to by Mr. Simmons references our regulation limit. By virtue of that 15 meters, the majority of the addition, so the house portion, would actually be beyond our regulation limit within the 30 meters. The elements that would be within our regulation limit is that canopy over the deck, which as shown on the plan isn't closer than the existing deck. It protrudes out a little bit, but not covering the entire deck. There's a bit of a terrace on the second floor that would fall within our regulation limit, but ultimately the proposal being largely over the existing was not of a concern to the Conservation Authority in terms of the work. The comments that Ms. McAlpine mentioned in terms of how they're measuring the setback, I defer to the city in terms of how they're going to approach the number in the variance. But at the end of the day, the proposal itself would be consistent with the goals and objectives that we're trying to protect.
Thank you, Mr. Lalonde. Ms. McAlpine, do you have any further comments with respect to Mr. Simmons' recent comment?
No, I have no further comments.
Thank you very much. I'll now proceed to the panel and ask them if they've got any comments. Ms. Chandler, any comments?
Yes, a few. Okay, so my first question is, how is the normal high water mark delineated on this? I didn't see a survey, or was it agreed to and with? Like who determined where the normal high water mark is? Where are we taking these measurements off of? I see an elevation on here, That would be question 1. Does someone want to answer?
Mr. Simmons?
Mr. Chair, in consultation with the Conservation Authority, the high water mark elevation was provided to the surveyor, and that line was mapped onto the survey. And that is how any measurements were determined, is from the mapped line from the survey. I know the survey is such a tiny scale to read, but it was there, and Mr. Lalonde provided the elevation to be mapped onto the survey.
Yep, and if I may add through the chair, we pull that information from Parks Canada navigational data for this section.
Okay, so there is a survey in this package somewhere that connects to the blue line on your diagram that measurements are being taken off of. My second question is, and this is probably to Ms. McAlpin, when I look at this, I would have thought that the variances that are being applied for would be from the normal high water mark to what's identified in pink as either the front of the new roof terrace, or perhaps what's not in pink but is identified as the new canopy above. Is that what you are telling us, is that the minor variance that's being requested is not connected to the correct part of the building?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in the notice, it was my understanding that a 15-meter setback was identified, which based on the plan provided corresponds to the existing deck. So it was unclear what was being proposed. Examining the plans, it would be my interpretation that they need a minor variance to both the new canopy, which was not identified in pink, as well as to the second-story addition, because it is that would be a structure being constructed within the 30-meter required setback to the watercourse. So both in effect.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I have 2 other short questions. Has the applicant had a conversation with their neighbor to the south? They seem to have some concerns about this in terms of the proximity to the lot line and the relationship that the addition will have with their building, given that you're asking for a reduction in that setback on that lot line.
Chair, should I respond to?
Yes, Mr.
comments?
Simmons. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we identified the 15 meters after conversations with a representative of the planning department that indicated that that would be that by asking for the 15 meters, we were both legalizing the existing construction and getting approval for the balance of the work and all the things that were being undertaken. So we didn't choose that 15-meter amount out of the sky. We did it after talking to the planning department. Also, all of the roof on the main floor is being replaced and slightly enlarged. So any element, not just the second floor terrace and the new canopy that sticks out a couple of feet over the some of the windows, really everything that we're doing, is in effect meeting the variance. I have read the neighbor's comments. I have talked to the neighbor. I didn't manage to or I didn't manage to achieve an understanding with the neighbor. However, I would very much like the opportunity to speak to those concerns at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we can come back to that. Where is the well and septic located on this property?
The septic field is located towards the road, well away from the front of the house. The well, I would have to look for, I'm sorry, but I do know that we're putting in a new septic field and that it will have to be located away from the well.
My concern is with respect to the access down the side property lines. I mean, you can't get a drill rig through a garage, even if it's open at both ends. I'm more drawing that to your attention as a concern. But back to the variances, from what I understand, while it seems like you've gotten sort of two pieces of different information from the city, Mr. Chair, I don't particularly have any issues with the proposal in itself, what's being built. I am very concerned that we would be issuing a minor variance for the wrong thing, like for the wrong distance to the wrong thing.
Are you talking about variance number 1A, or are you talking about B or C?
Yeah, variance number 1, which, well, the one to 15 meters, yeah, which provides a variance from the normal high water mark to the existing deck rather than to the new construction. That concerns me. And I don't know the answer as to which one of those is correct. But it seems that the applicant has received one set of information and city planning is providing us this different opinion. So we can go along from here, but I would suggest that we give the opportunity to the applicant to choose to have an adjournment at some point, straighten this out just for their own assurance that they're getting the variance they need in order to move forward with building permit.
Mr. Simmons?
Mr. Chair, if the approval was granted on condition of compliance with the design drawings submitted, would that achieve the same effect, or were we still in danger of not having it worded properly? I mean, I'm really, at this point, of course, I have to protect my client's interest so we don't have to make a new application.
Right.
So if it's definitely the opinion of the planning department that item number one, variance number 1 needs to be rewritten, we'll have to do that. I have to go along with that.
Before we respond to that,
the plans is sufficient, then that would be okay too.
Okay, Ms. Chandler, you had your hand up.
I don't think there would be a new application, and you can correct me, but this is an improvement to the variance being asked for, and you're bringing it closer into conformity with the zoning bylaws. I don't believe there would be hopefully it would just be a 2-week adjournment, and it may be that our secretary treasurer or deputy secretary treasurer could speak to that.
Deputy Secretary?
Yes, it would be an adjournment to October 21st to clear up that issue.
Okay. I think before we go on to the rest of the panel, it may be a good idea to see if everybody is in agreement to adjourn this until we can resolve this issue till October 21st. So I'd like to ask the panel if they agree with adjourning this application until October 21. All in favor? So we're going to adjourn your application, Mr. Simmons, until October 21, when you can discuss with Ms. McAlpin what you need to do to resolve this first variance issue.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I have a little question that if we change the wording of variance number 1 to talk about all the different work that is being undertaken, does it then need to be recirculated, which would require further delay?
Madam Deputy Secretary, can you answer that question?
At the yes, Mr. Chair, at the current request at 15 meters, as Member Chandler had advised, we would probably be improving the situation. So it might be an amendment, but as long as it's not any closer than the 15 meters, say to 14.5 or something along that lines. So a recirculation would not be necessary.
Thank you. So are you good with that, Mr. Simmons?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Perfect. So this application will be adjourned until October 21. Thank you. Now we'll move on to application number 2, having to do with 6900 Bleaks Road. Is Mr. Cliff Townsend here? Mr. Townsend. I don't see him as a guest. Mr. Townsend, are you here? Okay, so we'll move on to application number 3.
No mic.
He's
Mr.
got
Chair,
no
he's
mic?
just logging into the hearing.
All right. You need to be unmuted, Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, I'm just getting to it. Okay,
Okay.
here I am.
Perfect. We need to administer an oath about the statutory declaration of, are you able to take that oath?
I am. I did send in a statutory declaration, though.
We'll cover
Mr.
both
Chair,
these. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I can confirm that I did receive that yesterday.
Okay. Thank you very much. We don't need to apply to administer the oath then. Mr. Townsend, could you please describe a little bit your application today?
Sure, I've got a few slides, but really there's only one that needs to be covered. 6900 Bleaks Road is a 0.8 hectare lot that's been severed from our farm on Bleaks Road, 6990. The goal in that is to provide affordable access to home ownership for our daughter and her partner. The first step was to sever the lot from the farm, and that process began in November 2018. The lot was ultimately registered after a hearing there in October of 2019. So the next step was to get the building permit. Application submitted September 2019, and the permit was approved in November of 2019. It was late enough in the year that we decided we didn't want frost under the footings, so we delayed the build until May of 2020 to avoid problems over the winter. When I went to pick up the building permit, which I'd been advised to do back in the fall of 2019, the city refused to issue the permit. And up until the point that we're at this particular minor variance now, I've not been able to get the permit issued. So the minor variances are sought to allow us to have the permit issued so that we can begin the build. Again, it's getting late enough in the year that we may have to delay again, but nonetheless, we want to proceed. It's even more important now to have affordable access to home ownership. It's gone absolutely crazy out there. So that, in a nutshell, is where we're at.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. I'd like to ask Mr. Walker on behalf of the city to make some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff has reviewed the application and has no concerns with the proposal.
Thank you very much. Panel, I'd like to ask Mr. Lewis if he has any comments or questions.
Yeah, a comment to Mr. Walker. The entrance for this lot will be onto an unopened road allowance, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So is the city's position that we can do this now? Like
So,
we haven't been able to.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, the department reviews applications on case-by-case basis, and in this particular circumstance, the department has no concerns with this. The applicant is working with building code services and planning services to have the variances granted and have the building permit issued so that they can have access to the property.
So have we got confirmation from the road department? We have a snowplow goes down, a school bus goes down, hydro goes down, garbage truck goes down, mail car goes down.
So while I can't speak for every department in the city, I can confirm that the planning services is working along with building code services so that the applicant can have their permit issued so that they can have access to the property.
See, I have a real problem with having a access down a unopened road allowance. We've never allowed that before unless the applicant built the road up to standards where the vehicles I just mentioned could go down, turn and get back out safely. How did this happen in the beginning? Any idea how we granted, how planning services recommended a lot on an unopened road allowance?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the application was submitted last year, and it was an oversight by the department, and the department didn't recommend that the road be built, and the property was created. And so as a way to sort of fix that issue, the department is supporting the variances for this property. I would note that, and I guess just to address your question about access, the property at 6870 Bleaks Road has structures on it, and access is provided to that property from Bleaks Road.
No more questions right now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Otto, do you have any questions, comments, concerns?
Yes, yeah, I do have concerns about this because if we allow this for one person, I would think we have to allow it for everybody that's on an unopened road allowance. Personally, I had a situation a number of years ago under the current Osgood, or the old Osgood Township, where I had to improve a road for 100 feet at that time. It was the time to the current standards to be able to get access to my 90 acres of land that I had purchased. So I would like to see this go back to someone and get this completely hammered out before we approve these minor variances, because I don't think it's correct.
Yes, Mr. Walker.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to address Mr. Otto's question, I can confirm that senior staff in planning service or the planning infrastructure and economic development department, our city's chief legal counsel, as well as building services have been involved in this application, and I can confirm there are no issues with granting the variances for this property. There's nothing left to be hammered out.
Okay. Any further questions, Mr. Otto?
No, I think I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Mr. Revort, any questions, comments, or concerns?
It sounds like an error was made, and I think from planning's comments, I'm satisfied that the issues will be addressed. I view this as a one-off situation. So those are my only comments on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any questions, comments, or concerns? Please unmute your. There.
I agree that this is an error that needs to be fixed, and it's probably not the applicant's fault that it came about. It should have been fixed before it was granted. I'm very worried about fire truck access or something if there was an emergency on the property. But I hope that there will be a move to improve the road up to the front of the property by the city sometime in the near future. But I'm not going to hold the applicant hostage to that.
Okay,
I'll make a comment on access to the property. The owner of the property further down the road gets regular delivery of propane with a tandem axle truck. He has no issues.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. You have any further comments, Mr. Lewis?
Just a question, Mr. Walker. I actually know the site. I visited the site. Who will be paying to make a turnaround for stuff? Like there's the road can't do what you say or needs to do. The planning department made a mistake and they're looking at us to get them off the hook. Here's what's going on. Who's going to pay to make that road viable for a school bus, snow plow, things to turn? Is the city going to cover that bill?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so just to clarify, the planning department didn't make a decision on the application to approve the creation of the lot. That was made by the Committee of Adjustment. In terms of the improvement of the road, when the city decides to improve the road, the city will then pay for that because it'll be a city initiative at that time. unless the applicant or the property owners want to improve the road themselves before it's in the city's work plan.
Just to clarify, the committee adjustment approved it on the information that the planning department gave them. Just want that noted in the records. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments, Mr. Townsend?
No.
Okay. I too was concerned about the value of the cost of the road widening and who was going to pay for it. But since Mr. Walker suggested that the city will be doing that, I think that'll be a great compromise on behalf of the city. Yes, sir. Mr. Walker.
Sure, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Lewis' question, based on my understanding, was about the road extension. In terms of road widening, this is a minor variance application and there is no road widening required. The road widening was taken at the time of consent last year.
But if it needs to be widened because it needs to handle the various different vehicles Mr. Lewis has suggested, will the city pay for that?
Well, the road was widened last year to the standard that it should be. So based on my understanding, there shouldn't be any further road widening that's required unless the road is reclassified.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel if they would like to approve this application. All those in favor of approving this application, please raise your hand. All those against approving this application? Thank you very much. Your application is approved, Mr. Townsend.
Thank you very much, committee members.
Now we'll move on to application number 3, having to do with 4524 Northwoods Drive. Is Mr. Firth available? I see him here. Mr. Firth, can you unmute your microphone?
Yes, apologies for that.
No worries. Thank you very much. I don't think we have a statutory declaration on file today, so I need to administer an oath. Are you prepared to take that oath, sir?
Yes, I am.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do. I can.
Thank you very much. Please proceed. Describe your application for us.
Yeah, well, first of all, apologies for being on my phone with my headphones. My kid's part of the virtual classing. So as it stands right now, I'll do my best to try and minimize the background noise for you. So I think I've got a better site plan than that right now. If you want to just scroll through to the next slide, please. So what I'm proposing is a detached double garage in my in my urban property. I live out in Woodlawn, and it's going to be of the dimensions are 22 by 25, and I'm applying for 2 variances today. One which is within a 30-meter setback of a watercourse, which is not really much of a watercourse. I think it's more of a ditch from my neighbor's yard across the street. But that is outlined in the survey. And the other one is to reduce the interior setback from my neighbor's yard to mine from what it should be down to 1 meter. So as you can see, it's a lean-to roof. It's 14 meters at the front, 14 feet at the front, going down to 10 at the back. So being lower than both my neighbors' garages. And yeah, I mean, if you want to scroll through again, I think you can probably see a cross-section drawing there. Oh, so there you go. There's the site survey. So on the right-hand side there is the Ottawa River, so Buckham's Bay, which you can see is significantly far away from where the garage pad is, which is I think about 200 feet. And then if you look to the left-hand side, you'll see where the city road is, which is Northwoods Drive. The actual watercourse itself is to the left of there. So the distance that I'm requesting is 25.9 meters from the 30-meter setback that's required from a typical watercourse. So again, it's I wish I had more detail. It's not as detailed as the first one. It's I'm just applying for a double garage with 2 variances.
Thank you, Mr. Firth. I'd like to ask Mr. Walker to make some comments on behalf of the city, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has reviewed the application and has no concerns with it. Staff is satisfied that the 4 tests are met in this instance. Staff,
thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any comments, Mr. Vivort?
No, I'm fine with it. It seems to meet the 4 tests, and I believe the conservation partners in this case are also.
Thank you. Mr. Otto, any comments, questions, or concerns?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
Nope, nothing.
Ms. Chandler?
No concerns.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to ask the committee if they'd like to approve this application. All in favor? Your application is approved, Mr. Firth.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Now we'll move on to application number 4. Application number 4 having to do with 531 Albert Boyd Private. And is Ms. Sikoli Supo here?
Mr. Chair, we've just received an email from the agent on this file and she's having a hard time logging on. If we could stand it down and bring her on later on the agenda.
Absolutely, we'll try and address. Let me know when she's able to access the meeting, and then we'll put her back on in the next available slot.
Okay.
Now we'll move. Thank you. Now we'll move on to application number 5, having to do with 5480 Bank Street. Mr.
I think that
Dobbs,
was adjourned, Mr. Chair.
you're correct. Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Revort. We'll move on to application number 6. And it's having to do with 2318 Summerside Drive. Is Mr. Timothy Bede here?
Hello, Mr. Chair. This is Tim Bede from Vote 10, representing the property owner on this property.
Good morning, Mr. Bede.
Good morning.
We don't have a statutory declaration on file for you. Are you able to take the oath?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
Yes, I do.
Please give us a brief overview of your application.
Will do. Thank you. So my name is Timothy Bede. I am here with my colleague Paul Black from Vote 10 Planning Design. We are the agents representing the property owner at 2318 Summerside Drive outside of Manitic. So I'll go through quickly and then leave some time for questions at the end. The subject property, and I'll go to the next slide, please. The subject property is municipally known as 236 and 2316 and 2318 Summerside. It's located in the Greater Manitic area. It abuts the Rideau River to the west. It's currently occupied by an existing 2-story detached residential dwelling, 2 accessory buildings, an above ground pool, and a deck attached to the dwelling, providing access to the pool. It has frontage of approximately 36 meters on Somerset Drive and 71 meters along the Rideau River interface. Total area of 4,425 square meters. In the area, the residential properties are located directly north, south, and east of the property, abutting the Rideau River. And further afield, the area consists of more rural residential properties, agricultural and woodland, located approximately 7 kilometers from the village of Manitic, 3.5 of the village of Paris. Next slide, please. So I'll get back to the zoning and official plan designation in the rationale just to provide some context. The subject property is currently zoned rural residential and subzone 4 with floodplain overlay on the portion abutting the river on a small portion of the property. Next slide, please. And designated general rural area in the official plan. Next slide, please. So I'll get into the details of the application. The application for minor variance pertains to 3 separate yet concurrent construction projects on the property, as detailed throughout this presentation. So in summary, the property owner proposes to construct a 2-story addition to the existing attached dwelling. And I'll go to the next slide, please. and a two-story addition to the existing detached dwelling consisting of a garage and home office in the front yard. The proposed addition is 2 stories, 7.2 meters in height with a total gross floor area of around 92 square meters. And we can see that at the foreground there. The second portion of this application is that a second-story deck at the rear of the subject detached dwelling, total area of 29.5 square meters, a height of 2.74 meters from a grade. That's the portion, the triangular portion in orange here, kind of in between the existing corners of the existing dwelling. And the third aspect of this application is an addition to the existing accessory building located along the northern property line. The proposal is to renovate the existing accessory building along the northern edge of the property. The existing building currently has a floor area of around 20 square meters. It's located 8.5 meters from the property line to the north and 1.74 from the eastern property line. And the proposed addition is going to extend from the south facade of the existing building, resulting in a total cumulative area of 43.9 square meters and a new setback to the eastern property line of 0.93 meters, maximum height of around 3 meters. So the areas of construction are indicated in orange. The minor variance required for this application pertain to permission to construct a building or structure within 30 meters of the normal high water mark and watercourse setback as established in section 69 of the zoning bylaw. So relief from the normal high water mark setback provision is required for all 3 structures. The closest being the second story deck, which is 12.47 meters from the normal high water mark. We are also asking for permission to construct an expansion to the existing accessory building with an interior side yard of 9.93 meters, whereas the zoning bylaw requires 4.5 meters from the side yard. And finally, permission to construct the proposed second story, that's the accessory building, for a second story deck to project into the rear yard of 2.5 meters, whereas the zoning bylaw table 65 stipulates that a deck over 0.6 meters in height must not project more than 2 meters into the rear yard, side yard. So I'll go over a few slides here. Next slide, please. The proposed addition to the detached home is seen on the left of the right of the screen here as a 2-story garage and office building. Next slide, please. And here we can see an elevation of the proposed two-story deck to the side and rear of the property. Next slide, please. And this is another elevation of showcasing both the proposed 2-story addition to the garage and office space attached to the existing dwelling, as well as the deck to the side and rear. Next slide, please. So I'll show some site photos to give a kind of an indication of the current condition in terms of landscaping and site layout, and then I'll describe the 4 tests. We can see here the proposed addition to the garage in the front of the house is screened by the existing mass and form of the building. Next slide, please. This is the existing portion of the accessory building, which is to be expanded. Next slide, please. We can see here that the existing accessory building to be expanded is significantly screened from the river and from budding properties through a significant grove of trees. The second accessory building in the foreground here is proposed to be removed after the expansion of the other accessory building. Next slide, please. And another angle or viewpoint of the significant tree grove, which will screen the proposed additions from the river view plains and from neighboring properties. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'll go into the next slide, please. And this is indicating where the proposed new second-story deck will fit into the existing built form of the single detached home. So it won't protrude in any way from the existing footprint. It kind of Next slide, please. And from an aerial view, we can see the three proposed aspects of this project, how they kind of fit within the layout of the site and the existing screening from the landscaping and mature trees, which will help to mitigate any visual or other impacts on the river, visual viewscape on the river, and or from abutting neighboring properties. Next slide, please. So I'll just go over a few key points and how this project addresses the test of a minor variance. As mentioned earlier, the subject property is designated general rural area in the official plan. The general rural area permits a range of land uses, which are meant to be appropriate and compatible for a rural location. The proposed variances conform to the relevant policies of the general area and maintain the intent of the designation to maintain a rural character and scale of the development. These are all modest additions to the existing built form on the property. Most importantly, the variances being considered in this regard is how they relate or impact to the adjacent properties. So the overall design of the proposed development will complement the massing patterns, rhythm, and character of the existing dwelling. And it's proposed to use a similar and complementary and respectful materials and low profile massing to integrate into the area. In regard to the proximity to the water course, the proposed garage and office addition is located in such a way that it will be buffered from the river by the existing primary dwelling. And the remainder of the addition to the accessory building is set back significantly from the high water mark and has the benefit of existing substantial tree cover. As well, the proposed second-story deck fits within the existing built form and is actually closer to conformance than many portions of the existing buildings. Of note, ongoing communication with the Reed Valley Conservation Authority has occurred throughout the design phases of this project, and initial reviews have deemed the proposal to be appropriate and found that no significant or negative impacts are expected to nearby residents or the health of the river ecosystem. For the zoning bylaw, the subject property is zoned rural residential subzone 4. It's also subject to a portion of the property being covered by a floodplain overlay closest to the river. The proposed development includes the new deck at 12.4 meters from the property line. And all proposed works are at least as far from the normal high water mark as the existing structures, and in some senses screened by the existing structures in terms of their impacts on the riverway. The purpose of the R4 is to impose development standards that will ensure new development is compatible and complementary. So in that light, the general intent of the zoning bylaw is maintained, as the proposal is for additions to existing structures which are permitted within the zone, and will provide sufficient setback from the high water mark to ensure no negative impacts. In terms of the appropriateness of the development, the existing accessory buildings will be set back and screened. It represents a consolidation of the two accessory buildings to one, so reducing visual impacts from the river and from neighboring properties. And the garage is, as mentioned previously, functionally screened and of a materiality and design that reflects and complements the existing buildings. So finally, they are minor in nature, as the impacts of the deck and the garage and the accessory building are minimal, are screened from view from the river view planes as well as from neighboring properties, are representing only modest additions to the existing built form, and provide for investment in the property. So that's generally our presentation. I'll answer any questions you might have at this point.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do, though, is move on to Mr. Walker and see if Mr. Walker has any questions, comments from the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has reviewed the application, has no concerns with it. Staff does note that the Rita River is part of, or is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And as such, the proposal was reviewed by our heritage planning team, who reviewed the proposal against the applicable policies within the official plan, and they had no concerns with the application. They suggested that a cultural heritage impact statement was not required in this case. And as such, staff is satisfied that the 4 tests are met.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I'd like to ask our conservation partners if they have any questions or comments to make.
Through the chair, I just kind of want to follow up to the presentation by Mr. Bede. The three parts, and I'll kind of go through in the same order. The garage itself came in previously, and a permit through the Conservation Authority was issued for the garage aspect prior to this minor variance coming in. I believe there's a previous process to that, and some revisions to the garage would be required. The remainder of the project, or including the garage, is subject to the Conservation Authority's regulation area, and permits would be required from our office. With regards to the deck, the project that's been presented, as noted, isn't extending further than the existing kind of corner to the river, so there isn't a further encroachment from the existing, and a majority of that deck is over an existing I guess outcropping of the first floor building. So there's really that triangular piece. Also to be noted that the project, subject to the regulations, there's additional works that I don't believe was mentioned by the presentation that we would be handling through our permitting process and condition of enhanced landscaping along the shoreline to improve the shoreline was required. And again, through our permitting process and conditions, there's an existing shed that is to be removed. I think that was mentioned in one of the photos. That's a little bit closer than the extension to the existing garage was also to be required. So I didn't see it marked on the plan, but I did see it in the drawing. Just wanted to note that those additional improvements are factored into the overall review. But yes, as noted, there are no concerns from the Conservation Authority on the overall project, and in addition to the permits that are still required by the Conservation Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Lalonde. I'd like to ask the panel if they have any questions or comments. Ms. Chandler?
I guess most of this I'm fairly comfortable with. I'm somewhat disappointed that the large addition put on the back side of the garage is not further in behind the building, because it does, like measured back from the water's edge, it does add a significant encroachment into the setback already. I mean, if that drawing came up, if you look at the largest of the orange additions, it's closer. I mean, it's not closer than the existing building, but that line going back, that's a new encroachment in a new location. I guess my question would be to the Conservation Authority. You mentioned a permit, a regulatory permit has already been issued for the garage addition. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, that is correct. A predecessor of mine had reviewed the garage and it issued a permit for the garage component only. And then I guess through the construction or their planning process, they've decided to include these other components to do them all at the same time. And that's why we're going to require a revision to the existing permit, as well as basically a new review for the two other components that have been integrated. And we've had discussions with the applicant on how to address those.
So again, I'm not particularly concerned about the deck or the addition to the auxiliary structure, but regulatory permits aside, is it your professional planning opinion that that part of the variance does meet the four tests?
Through the chair, I believe so.
Thank you.
Mr. Revord, any questions, comments, or concerns?
None, thank you.
Mr. Otto, any questions or comments or concerns?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments or concerns?
No, I'm good with this application, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask the panel to approve this application. All those in favor? Your application is approved, Mr. Bede. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee.
Mr. Chair, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt, but just letting you know, we do have the agent for item number 4 in attendance now.
Great. We'll move on to item number 4 then. And Ms. Sikoli Zupo, are you available? Need to unmute your mic.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Sikoli Zupo. I don't believe we received your statutory declaration for the property, so I need to provide you or ask you to take an oath. Are you available to do that?
Yes, I am.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
Yes, I do swear.
Thank you very much. Can you please give us a brief overview of your application today?
Yes, so this application involves the property located at 531 Albert Boyd Private. So you'll see that our property that we're dealing with is the one located on the left, lot 75, and specifically as well also lot 76, which is 533 Albert Boyd. The original M plan, which is the plan subdivision 4M1593, was registered, creating the lots as they exist there, lot 75 and lot 76. At that point in time, block 153 was not initially scheduled to be a street. There had been some changes, and with that, you'll see the day site triangle that was now a new addition that's been made. And because of that, the original house that was going to be built on lot 76 needed to be modified. And with the modification, it was discovered that there would not be sufficient side yard for the house to be built on lot 76. So what happened is a draft R plan, which I believe you have as well, has been created, which has the strip of 0.46 meters from front to back, being parts 1 and 2 on the draft R plan, has been carved out. And the application today is to sever the 0.46 meters from lot 75 and to add it to lot 76 to accommodate the home to be built on lot 76.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McAlcon, could you please give us an overview of the city's comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, the city has no concerns about the application and simply ask that should the application be approved, the standard conditions that I included in my report be included.
Thank you, Ms. McAlpine. Mr. Revord, any questions or comments?
None, thank you.
Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments? I could not hear you. Your mic is muted.
No, I'm good with the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otto, any questions or comments?
I'm good with it. Thank you.
Ms. Chandler, any questions or comments?
No, all good.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the committee to approve this application. All in favor, please raise your hand. Your application is approved, Ms. Sikoli-Supo. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Okay, now I believe we're going to move on to application number 8. Is that correct, Madam Coordinator?
7.
I think we're on 7.
Okay.
On number 7.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on Mr. Burden or Ms. Burden. Are they available?
I believe the agent is Ms. Winch.
Correct. Thank you very much. Ms. Winch, are you available? Oh, there you are. Need to unmute your microphone, please.
Can you hear me now? There we are.
Yep. Absolutely, can hear you now. Yep.
Perfect. I think Mr. Burden is also available. Do you see him there?
Just a minute. Yes, I see him on as an attendee. Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Winch, we did not receive a statutory declaration with respect to the sign posting. Can you take an oath?
Yes, sure. I did drop one off at the front desk, but sure.
Okay, we'll do that in any event. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed and provide us with a brief explanation of your application today.
Absolutely. So I'm working with the Burdens, and they have a property on Highway 17. Originally, they had a farm and 2 lots that had previously been severed. What we're doing is we are doing a lot line adjustment to attach one of the lots that has road access from Old Highway 17 to incorporate parcel of land at the back. So as you can see, the one that the far right, this is the before. There's 3 lots and then the entire parcel. And now we're going to be doing the after photo. You have that there. There we go. So the after photo is adjusting the lot line to incorporate the parcel at the back, giving road allowance at Old Highway 17, creating or adjusting the lot line for the parcel with the house and barn, and then retaining the original lot.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, can I ask you to comment on behalf of the city?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has reviewed the application and has no concerns with the proposal, subject to the condition that's submitted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Do our conservation partners have any comments to make?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, the Conservation Authority has no concerns with the application.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ogden. Now I'd like to proceed to the panel, ask the panel if they have any questions or comments. Mr. Otto, any questions or comments with respect to this application?
Oh, it's perfectly clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rivort?
No comment or question. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
All good.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler?
I have no comments.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application. All in favor of the approval of this application? Thank you. Your approval is, this application is approved, Ms. Winch.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to application number 8, and I believe Ms. Chandler has a conflict, so we'll ask Ms. Chandler to say goodbye for the moment. And we will now proceed to hearing the application. Ms. Crabb, are you available? Ms. Crabb? I don't see her on the attendees list. Madam Coordinator, are you aware? Oh, there's something, somebody's trying to call in.
Yeah.
Hello.
I believe she's on.
Perfect.
Hello.
Hello, Ms. Crabb. Hi, Ms. Crabb.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am great. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So we don't have a statutory declaration on file with respect to the sign posting. Are you able to take the oaths confirming that you have had the sign posting on the lawn?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Could you please proceed and provide us with a brief overview of your application?
Yes, thank you. As an owner of lot 24, concession 6, 2800 Huntley Road, my husband would like to construct a 13.41 meter by 42 by 0.67 meter agricultural storage building to the west of the existing dwelling and garage as shown on plans filed with the committee. The proposed structure would house harvested crops from our property and be stored on pallets to further protect it. All the buildings we use to store crops, including from our property and equipment, are on the farm directly across from us, the Huntley Road severed. That farm has been in my husband's family for generations, but after the death of my father-in-law in 2018, his new wife now owns it, including the storage buildings we no longer have access to. It's been a challenging time since his passing, but we've managed to keep moving forward. Our entire property was rezoned in 2018 and is now located in the floodplain of Flowing Creek, which is why we're going through this process. Should a flood occur, the proposed structure would sit 20 inches higher than the land on packed stone dust and granular A 5/8 gravel. Our entire 35 acres is tile drained with runoff to the ditch north and east of our property. Under no circumstances will any hazardous materials be stored inside. We think it's a good idea for the committee to approve our application to construct, as we're investing in and rebuilding our lives and future, as well as the future of our children and grandchildren. Farming is in our blood, and it's the best way of life, being on the farm and living in the country. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Crabb. Ms. Turkington, can I ask you to make a comment with respect to this application from the city?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Staff have had an opportunity to review the proposal, and having reviewed it, staff do have some concerns with the proposal. It is noted that as per Schedule A of the city's official plan, the subject site is designated agricultural resource area, and that as per the city's zoning bylaw, the site is zoned agricultural zone, subzone 3, with the floodplain overlay being applicable. It is recognized that an agricultural use is an underlying permitted use under the zoning provisions. However, staff are concerned that the proposed structure will reduce the amount of permeable surface on the lot, which could result in more damage should a flood occur. Moreover, should a flood occur, there's the potential that the hay stored inside could be damaged and or destroyed. Staff would note that under no circumstances are hazardous materials, such as fuels or chemicals, to be stored in the proposed structure as per the city's official plan policy. Staff have no further comments.
Thank you, Ms. Turkington. I'd like to ask to have some comments from our conservation partners.
If I may, through the chair, the Conservation Authority has reviewed the proposal and has worked with the applicant in terms of their submission. The policies in which we review the project are a little different from the cities. However, we don't, I guess off the top, we don't have any objections to the application. Specifically, a permit will be required prior to the construction, and through that, confirmation and conditions that the structure itself will not contain any habitation, animal habitation, and sources of pollution will be addressed, as they wouldn't be able to store noxious chemicals or anything like that. So the permission for agricultural buildings under the review policies that the conservation would address would support a structure. The actual grade that structure would be constructed at may be constructed within a floodplain. There are certain elevations that we were going to work with to ensure that that's done in compliance with our policies. So ultimately, the Conservation Authority does not have an objection to the application that's before the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Lalonde. Ask the panel if they have any questions or comments. Mr. Vervoort?
I'm satisfied that it's for legitimate agricultural use. I believe that most of the issues or concerns addressed by the city, identified by the planning department, will be addressed through the permit application. So I have no other.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
No concerns with. I believe the city's concerns can be dealt with as the building's being built. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otto, any questions or comments?
No, if the Conservation Authority's in favor, so am I.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel to approve this application. All in favor of this application, please raise your hand. Your application is approved, Ms. Crabb.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Now we're moving on. Can the coordinator please let Ms. Chandler know that we are finished with application number 8? And we'll wait for Ms. Chandler.
Yes, I've let her know, and she's just coming back in now.
Great. Hello, Ms. Chandler. We're ready to go on to application number 9. Application number 9 is having to do with 21 Huntmar Drive. Is Mr. Richards available? I don't see Mr. Richards on the...
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Richards, I don't have a statutory declaration on file today with you for the sign that was posted on your property. Can you take an oath that it was there?
I can, sir.
Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do.
Thank you. Would you please proceed and provide us with a brief explanation of your application today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if I could have the slides brought up, please. I'll continue. There we go. The next slide, please. The site's located at 21 Huntmar Road. The site is approximately 4 acres in area. As you can see, it's highlighted on the page there. It's currently undeveloped land. To the north are single-family homes backing onto the property. To the west is the Welling Senior Citizens Complex. To the south is the Keg Restaurant, and across the road to the east is the Fairwinds Marketplace Shopping Center. The proposal is to build 332 apartment buildings in 2 buildings on the site. We go to the next slide, please. Along with the apartment buildings, there are 514 parking spaces, of which 79 are on the surface, and the remaining 196 are on 2 levels of underground parking. There's also 181 bicycle spaces provided indoors. The building to the north, which is on the left side of the site plan we're looking at now, is set back from the residential property line some 20 meters. Within that 20 meters, the city is asking that a pedestrian connection be built to connect Huntmar Drive from the sidewalks of Huntmar Drive to the open space, which is located to the north of Wellings and immediately to the west of the property. The requested variance is for an additional 5.8 meters in height over the permitted 15 meters for a total of 20.8 meters. The minor variance is required to accommodate 1 additional floor and increased height per floor. The bylaw permits 5 stories at 3 meters per story, which is in today's world is very difficult to build within. With increased ground floor ceilings for amenity areas in the lobby and an increased height per floor to accommodate the cold form steel framing I-span construction method, which includes a concrete floor for each floor. Under these types of conditions, we find that each floor, starting with the ground floor, is slightly higher than the bylaw anticipated 3 meters. The ground floor will be 3.8 meters in height and each other floor will be 3.3 meters. Mr. Chairman, this is nearly identical to an application you dealt with a few months ago with respect to the Wellings application, where a request to allow 20.4 meters was approved by this committee. That was July the 8th. We have also carried out shadow studies to address any possible impact to the residential developments to the north. That is available if you wish to see it here today. It shows very minimal impact, and particularly when you consider the impact that would have been there from the 5 stories that is permitted to the 6 stories that we're proposing today. I've read all the comments received from the city and the agencies and have no difficulty with those and concur. I've also responded to 1 letter that I was aware of concern filed by Mr. Underhill. I believe that correspondence has been made available to the committee. In my opinion, the 4 tests that are set out in the Planning Act have been met. The intent and spirit of the official plan and zoning bylaw, I believe, are being respected. The variance is minor in nature, and the variance represents appropriate development of the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ramirez, are you able to comment on behalf of the city?
Hello, yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Staff have no concern with the minor variance to permit a building height of 20.8 meters for a building located greater than 20 meters from a residential zone. And the department requests that any approval of any decision be worded to allow for modifications during the site plan control process.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. And I note that there's Victoria McCrum is also listed here.
Yes, Miss McCrum is a colleague of mine, and unless there's specific questions, no need for her to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel for their comments. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
No comments. I'm good with this one.
Thank you very much. Mr. Otto, any questions or comments?
And thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any questions or comments?
None.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort, any questions or comments?
I don't have any concern with it because it's going through site plan. I just wanted to confirm that this isn't increasing the density, the number of units. I think are staying the same. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Given that there's no further comments, I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application. All in favor? Your application is approved, Mr. Richards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Now I'd like to move on to application number 10, having to do with 6435 Fallowfield Road. Is Ms. Sarah Butt available?
Good morning.
Oh, morning, Mr. Clare. Are you representing this file?
I am, yes.
Great. We don't have a statutory declaration on file for you today. Are you able to take the oath for the statutory declaration?
I am, yes, thanks.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, as instructed, and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please proceed and provide us with a brief description of your application.
Okay, I've got a presentation. I'll wait for it to load here. Just to clarify, the coordinator will be loading it. Yeah, it's happening now. Perfect. Okay, perfect. So good morning. I'm Ben Clare, professional planner with McIntosh Perry. I've appeared before the committee a couple times in relation to approvals on the subject lands. With me today are Mark Steenbackers, the owner and future occupant of the lands to be severed, and Asad Rizwan of SS Wilson and Associates, the acoustical consultants. SS Wilson has been providing acoustical services to the city of Ottawa since about 1987, including the city's being responsible for the city's noise policy since 2014. Just a note in that regard, they're familiar. I usually try and keep my presentations quite brief, but this one warrants a couple of extra minutes. So thanks for everyone's patience in advance. I'm going to introduce the subject lands, the nature of the variances. I'm going to talk about the 4 tests, which should be committee's focus, as everyone's probably aware. I'm going to then talk about some of the background for context and then staff comments. Next slide, please. So the subject lands, committee and staff are familiar, 31.8 hectares, southwest of Huntley and Fallowfield Road intersection, just south of Stittsville and Goulburn. Next slide, please. This is a severance sketch. Now this severance is now conditionally approved. Committee members will recall that the lands have development potential, but that there are several constraints, including from a natural heritage standpoint, in relation to a proposed livestock facility, stables, the floodplain and adjacent properties that have potential for aggregate extraction. Next slide, please. These are the retained lands, which are the focus of the variance application. They're 21.3 hectares and have 113 meters approximately of frontage on Fallowfield Road. Next slide, please. So this slide identifies the subject lands in the context of their surrounding. The Argue pit, which is a largely inactive pit today, However, with an active pit license, it's been used for the most part over the last 20 years as stockpiling for material. It's adjacent to the northeast. It's designated sand and gravel resource area in the city's OP and is zoned ME2 in the zoning bylaw. Surrounding the Argue pit to the north is the Goulburn Middle School, and then opposite Huntley Road is approximately 30 residences on Kimini Drive. To the south of the subject lands opposite Fallowfield are largely agricultural lands owned by Walton International. Walton is advertising these lands as having future urbanized development potential. These lands are designated agricultural resource area, however, in the official plan and have ME3 zoning. Next slide, please. So the application that's in front of us today relates to clause 67 or section 67 of the bylaw. Clause 67(1)(a) of the bylaw requires as of right development to be located a minimum of 150 meters from ME2 or ME3 in order to, and I'm quoting here, to help ensure that new dwelling units are not located in close proximity to an existing or future noise or vibration generating use such as mineral extraction operation. This application requests minor and appropriate relief from this requirement to allow a dwelling to be located 40 meters from the ME2 zone, the Argue property, and 89 meters from an ME3 zone, which is the Walton lands opposite Fallowfield. Next slide, please. This is the sketch that was submitted for the variance application. We can refer back to it as needed. It works from the lot development plan that committee is probably most familiar with. Next slide, please. So this is close-ups of the sketch. It shows the proposed location of the dwelling, 40 meters from ME2 to the east again. And then you'll see that 75-meter setback is shown from the front property line. The actual relief being requested reflects 89 meters, and that additional 14 meters sits within Fallowfield Road and represents the distance from the front property line to the ME3 zone boundary, which is in the center line of Fallowfield Road. Next slide, please. I'm going to start in on the 4 tests. So first is the intent and purpose of the OP. So the subject lands are designated rural natural features. Policies of the general rural area are also applicable. Policy 372 establishes that it is intended that the general rural area, and I'm paraphrasing here, accommodates uses appropriate for a rural area, such that development will not, quote unquote, preclude or resist other non-residential uses. In this regard, policies of section 374 specific to mineral aggregate resources are probably most relevant to this application. This slide quotes the planning rationale, and I won't read it, where I conclude that the policies require a demonstration that new development will not conflict with current or future mineral extraction. At the bottom of the slide, section 487 is relevant as it's the section of the official plan that establishes that a noise study is required when development is proposed in proximity to a licensed pit. The noise study goes beyond this and considers we'll get into it in a moment, the theoretical full operation of the Argue pit, which is the only licensed pit that needs to be considered. It also contemplates the full concurrent extraction operation of the Walton lands and full operation at the Tarstone landscaping facility in the vicinity as well. And batching plants are also reflected in both the model or the model for both of the extraction related properties. Next slide, please. This slide provides the recommendations of the noise study. SS Wilson affirms that the proposed dwelling will meet the recommended objective sound levels, and this relates to Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, NPC 300 requirements. In my mind, this statement here is probably the most important statement in the application. It's uncontested. This satisfies the question of impact and OP conformity. And this is the case in many or most municipalities where I've sought noise-related approvals. In keeping with the recommendations of the aggregate impact assessment as well, just section 2.2 within the summary and recommendations of the noise study, it's worthwhile noting that a noise warning clause is also recommended. Next slide, please. This slide is an excerpt from the noise study of figure 4 from the noise study. It shows the noise contours and the operations on the 3 sites used as inputs. It includes dump trucks, ready mix trucks, front-end loaders, batching plants on both of the aggregate operations, and then the hypothetical aggregate operations. Pickup trucks with trailers at the Tarstone Landscape Facility. And I just need to remind everyone that these sites are not active today, but the noise study does contemplate full operation. It's important to note that this is different from the imagery provided within the staff's latest report. The figure provided within staff's latest report shows a berm. It's from the preliminary study that is based upon Google Earth contours. So revision 2 of the noise study was prepared based on more up-to-date topographic information. Section 1.8 of the noise study clarifies this, and that's the version, revision 2, that was submitted with the application. Next slide, please. With respect to the purpose and intent of the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw, the intent of the bylaw, in my opinion, is to prevent development from occurring within 150 meters of ME2 and ME3. Subsection 67.2 is important and helpful in that it expressly states that the purpose is to help ensure that new dwellings are not located in close proximity to an existing or future noise or vibration generating use, such as mineral extraction. So there's some clarification within the bylaw that's offered up. What's important to note here is that that these provisions apply to unmitigated, unstudied scenarios. It's reasonable to conclude, therefore, that if you provide evidence that confirms that the noise from hypothetical full concurrent operations of 3 noise generating facilities in the area meets the recommended MECP objective sound levels, the intent of the bylaw is upheld. To summarize, the bylaw is concerned with noise. If you prove that noise is acceptable, the intent of the bylaw is maintained. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a bit of background that explains minor in nature. There's a quote from an OMB decision here that establishes that the minor in nature test is widely accepted as being a test of impact. And it's not any impact, but undue, severe, or unreasonable adverse impact. This is really important in this one. Because to be frank, we're dealing with a big number when it comes to the relief being requested, but that big number is not what needs to be focused on in this particular application. And the noise study, again, with respect to minor in nature, confirms that the recommended MECP objective sound levels are met. Next slide, please. Given the very conservative noise study methodology and the low likelihood of full simultaneous operations of the facilities, including the 2 batching plants. The dwelling and the variances do not represent unreasonable or undue adverse impact. That's clear to me. This slide contains excerpts from the planning rationale, which refer to the fact that a noise warning clause is also recommended, and this will help prevent any impact upon the nearby aggregate related properties. It's worthwhile noting that the owner of the aggregate operation asked for this clause when consulted during the severance. Next slide, please. With respect to the desirability and the appropriateness of the proposal, this slide again offers quotes from the planning rationale. To summarize, committee's approval will allow development to proceed in accordance with permitted uses in keeping with PPS policy relating to development in rural areas on rural lands and in a location on the subject lands that is in keeping with the general pattern of other rural development in the area. Next slide, please. That concludes the portion of my presentation dealing with the 4 tests. And just to jump into a little bit of background, another couple of minutes here. This provides some of the background in the event that it might aid in discussion. To keep it simple, there was a whack back and forth by way of hearings and otherwise during the severance process. The day before the first hearing, we learned that a lot development plan was going to be desired or requested. After that, as the lot development plan was completed and the EIS, AIA, and MDS reports were reviewed and approved. At the 4th hearing, finally, when everything was up to everyone's expectations, the application was approved conditionally. One of the major points I want to focus in on this slide is the December 13th lapse date. This date was actually the impetus for this particular application. So we recognize that the variance, although a variance specifically is referred to on the lot development plan as being potentially required in the future, the location of the proposed dwelling on the retained lands is not. Now that the owner is at a point where he's roughly satisfied that he knows where the location of the proposed dwelling, he's got those plans available. We urged him to proceed with this application now in the event that the lot development plan could be tidied up and to prevent any kind of confusion in the future when people are referring back to those approvals and the agreement. Put simply, that backfired, and we're now kind of on opposite sides of the table as city staff. I do still think that there's an opportunity though to have that all tidied up before the severance is finalized. Just another note here, I forgot to include September 16th hearing within the minor variance. That one was adjourned, as committee members might be familiar with, to deal with staff comments. Next slide, please. This is the lot development plan that was approved. It's here in the event that we need to refer to it. Next slide, please. And again, this is somewhat of a zoom in, and the notes are contained as well at the top of the plan, identifying that relief from the zoning bylaw could be required. We knew that. And that was discussed a couple of times. I'll mention that in more detail in a moment. The thick black lines are the unconstrained development envelopes on the properties, on the parcels rather. Next slide, please. So staff comments, I'll try and keep this as brief as I can. Agency comments largely do not raise any issues. The MBCA does identify the need for a permit given the location of the proposed dwelling within the regulated area, and it's relatively close to the floodplain. Planning staff comments are not supportive. Staff assert that the proposal represents a departure from what had been discussed during the severance. Trying to keep it brief here, staff are vehement in their defense of PPS and official plan policy that seeks to discourage development in close proximity to aggregate. Staff asked questions about a berm that had been identified in a previous version, a preliminary version of the noise study. Staff conclude that the variance in their opinion is not minor and that it could impact the viability of aggregate despite the noise study that suggests otherwise. Staff's comments, in my opinion, are problematic and in some cases could be misleading to committee members and the reader. It's clear in my mind that the lot development plan was foremost intended to identify as of right development potential on the retained and severed parcels to ensure committee members and staff will be comfortable proceeding. Variances were in fact discussed openly with staff and committee on several occasions, and the proposed location of the dwelling is the same as it was depicted in the original preliminary noise study. This is explored in detail in my September 23rd response to staff's initial round of comments. The tone of staff's comments seemed to be from the perspective that any variance from the requirements of the bylaw would be inappropriate, and they don't seem to weigh the results of the noise study whatsoever. Staff's tone actually made me question whether or not the city ever permits development within 150 meters of ME2, ME3, or ME. Within a pretty quick period, we were able to find 50 dwellings within 150 meters, some closer than 40 of ME2. We didn't even look at ME3 or ME, but I'm sure that we'd be able to find many more. Staff asked one methodological question about the noise study in the berm, which I answered in my September 23rd response regarding topography. There's no discussion in staff's response about whether or not 40 meters is appropriate versus 20 or 80. Their comments and opinion in this regard and on whether or not the proposal is minor in nature, in my opinion, appear to be non-technical in this regard, which is important. I understand staff are busy, but frankly, I've found these comments to be frustrating, given that I know that committee members have limited amounts of time to review the details of an application, and that committee relies somewhat on staff's opinion for direction. A couple of examples within the first round of comments, staff suggests that the classification of the Walton lands in relation to the Aggregate Resources Act is unclear, when in fact it is known there's no license on that property. Therefore, there's no status. Staff state that there are nearby extraction pits with active licenses. The only pit within 300 or even 500 meters that warrants consideration is the Argue pit. Staff suggests that the official plan prohibits new development within 300 meters of sand and gravel resource area, whereas the policies are actually quite permissive in their language. The language used within the policy is that new development will not be approved unless it can be demonstrated that there is no conflict. New development may be approved if it can be demonstrated that the resource will not be affected. Staff's September 30th comments correct some of these items. However, there's still a couple of substantial problems, and I'm almost done here. The only reference to the noise study relates to the difference between revisions 1 and 2. And in my mind, the flavor of staff's comments are indicating that the mitigation measure was simply removed. And that's problematic. Staff's lack of support as well for the aggregate impact assessment is not discussed in adequate detail. It's unclear if they do not accept the findings based on the hydrogeological evidence provided, aerial photo history, updated noise information, or something else. This document was specifically requested to be updated by staff. We did that, and we're unclear as to why they don't take issue, or why they take issue with it. Next slide, please. I think the slide, or it's possible the presentation is gone. In conclusion, as evidenced by the planning rationale, the updated AIA, and the noise study, the variances requested are in fact in keeping with the intent of the OP and bylaw They are minor, as evidenced by the noise study, and are desirable for the development of the subject lands. Happy to take any questions whatsoever.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clare. I would like to ask Mr. Walker to have some comments, or is it Ms. Turkington? Oh, I got the wrong. Yes, I believe it's Ms. Turkington. Ms. Turkington, can you please give us some comments on behalf of the
Thank
city?
you, Mr. Chair. Staff have had an opportunity to review the variances and object to the application as proposed. It is noted that staff reviewed the materials submitted in association with the proposal and not hypothetical variances. We can only consider what is before us. I will first begin by highlighting staff's position by providing a bit of background, then discussing the provincial policy statement and the Aggregate Resources Act, followed by the official plan, the zoning bylaw, and the studies submitted to support the application. In December of 2019, the committee conditionally approved the related consent application, thereby allowing the creation of a new lot for residential development. Both the severed and retained parcels are very constrained, notably being within the floodplain, having significant wetlands, and are within the influence zone of two property zone mineral extraction, or ME zone, under the current zoning bylaw, 2330 Huntley Road and 6426 Fallowfield Road. It is noted that 6426 Fallowfield Road and 2330 Huntley Road are designated agricultural resource area and sand and gravel resource area, respectively, on Schedule A of the city's official plan. Given these constraints, a lot development plan was prepared, submitted, and accepted by both the committee members and city staff, identifying a viable building envelope on the retained lands. As part of the consent process, it was noted to the applicant and included in a condition that any conformity issues on the retained parcel would necessitate a minor variance application. Staff did not comment on any specific variances at the time of the consent application, and it is noted that the applicant did not pre-consult on the proposed variances with city staff prior to submitting an application. During the review of the variance application, city staff examined the provincial policy statement, the Aggregate Resources Act, the official plan, the zoning bylaw, the revised mineral resource impact assessment, or MRIA for short, and the noise study submitted by the applicant. The PPS, or provincial policy statement, protects mineral aggregate resources for the long term and requires that extraction operations be undertaken in such a way that minimizes social, economic, and environmental impacts. The policies of the PPS also stipulate that development near mineral aggregate operations be permitted only if rehabilitation and other measures have been undertaken. It is noted that under the Aggregate Resources Act 1990, 2330 Huntley Road has an active Class A extraction license granted by the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, which enables the owner of 2330 Huntley Road to remove more than 20,000 tons of aggregate annually. Once the resource at 2330 Huntley Road is exhausted, the land is required to be rehabilitated under the Aggregate Resources Act. It is unclear if the land at 6426 Fallowfield Road has an active license under the Aggregate Resources Act, but nonetheless, there's the potential for an aggregate extraction operation to begin, and that must be taken into consideration. Under Schedule A of the official plan, the subject site is designated Rural Natural Features Area and is zoned Rural Countryside Zone under the zoning bylaw. The subject site is, as noted previously, within the influence area of two ME zones and a designated sand and gravel resource area. The intent of the sand and gravel resource area, designated on both urban and rural land use schedules of the official plan, are to protect aggregate resources for future use from incompatible activities and to minimize negative impacts on communities. The official plan prohibits new development within 500 meters of a bedrock resource area or within 300 meters of a sand and gravel resource area, unless the applicant demonstrates that the proposed development will not conflict with future mineral extraction operations. Conflicting land uses include new dwellings and the creation of new lots. An MRIA to support the consent application was submitted to city staff and has since been updated to support the proposed variance. As the property is within the influence zone of a sand and gravel resource area, Section 67 of the zoning bylaw pertaining to the mineral extraction zone setback, Section 67 of the zoning bylaw stipulates that any dwelling must be a minimum of 150 meters away from the boundary of a property zoned ME2 or ME3. The intent of the setback stipulated by Section 67
is to ensure that new development, specifically residential uses, which is a sensitive use, are not located in close proximity to current or future noise, vibration, and dust generation associated with aggregate extraction operations. By stipulating that a 150-meter buffer between a dwelling and a mineral extraction operation be provided, the zoning bylaw further ensures that mineral extraction operations are not hindered by sensitive uses. It is noted that there is a small residential development opposite Huntley Road and 2330 Huntley Road along Community Drive. Based on aerial photos, it appears as though the homes along Community Drive were constructed sometime in the 1990s, prior to the city's current zoning bylaw taking effect. It is noted that Goulburn Middle School is also nearby. And while staff are unable to comment further as it relates to the circumstances that permitted the houses on Community Drive or the school to be constructed, it's suggested that a situation that's not desirable, of which neither of those really are under the current zoning and official plan policies, not be used as precedent. As per official plan policies, a noise study was prepared in November of 2019 in support of the proposed severance. That noise study was updated in May 2020 and submitted with the variance application. In the initial noise report from November, a berm was suggested along the lot line abutting 2330 Huntley Road. The updated noise report no longer suggests a berm without extensive rationale for it no longer being proposed, and instead notes that the proposed dwelling will meet objective, stationary, and traffic noise levels within MECP criteria. The updated noise study also suggests on page 6 that should sound levels exceed the acceptable standard, it would be the aggregate operations responsibility to institute necessary noise controls. Additionally, a revised mineral resource impact assessment, or MRIA, supporting the variances was received by city staff September 23rd, 2020. Staff have reviewed the revised report, and from a technical perspective, do not agree with a number of comments in the report and the conclusion that the variance should be granted. The report does not demonstrate that the proposed dwelling would appropriate, nor that the resource is protected. While the aggregate operation is responsible for noise mitigation for its operations and for impacts on nearby sensitive uses existing at the time of new or expanded aggregate licensing, it is not their responsibility for sensitive uses constructed subsequently and counter to the policies contained within the PPS 2020, the city's official plan, and the provisions in the zoning bylaw. Having reviewed the application, it is the professional opinion of city staff that the variances as proposed and as before us today do not meet the intent of the official plan and the zoning bylaw and would result in an undesirable location for a detached dwelling, and that the relief proposed is not minor in nature. As the proposal does not uphold the required 4 tests prescribed under the Planning Act, the Planning Department respectfully requests the variance application as proposed be refused.
Thank you, Ms. Turkington. Mr. Clerk, can you be brief in your rebuttal?
Yeah, I will be brief. Again, I'd just like to kind of emphasize that the type of language staff are using is unhelpful and unobjective. Staff start off by saying that the properties are very constrained, which is subjective language. We should be looking at the fact that the properties are constrained and then exploring the specific nature of the constraints. The constraints that apply to this particular variance application are not environmental. They don't relate to the floodplain. MDS is not an issue. It's the specifics of the aggregates that need to be considered here. Staff this morning again are commenting on as of right development requirements within the official plan and zoning bylaw and the PPS, seemingly with no regard for the noise study, the findings of the noise study, this technical document that is identified as a requirement in these instances under the official plan. As well, I note that staff have commented on the homes of on Kimini Drive and the Goulburn Middle School as being undesirable. They acknowledge through you, Mr. Chair, that they don't know the particulars of those approvals. And again, I think the language and the tone of staff's comments walk committee in the wrong direction and are only providing partial information that could be used to confuse committee members. I make these comments with respect for staff and how busy staff are, but I do think that the tone of staff comments are problematic and misguided. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clare. I note that there's Mr. Assad is also on the screen. Is Mr. Assad here to make comments on this application?
Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. So we did this study initially last
One
year.
moment, Mr. Assad. Can you just state your relationship with whomever you're representing here today?
Sure. So I've been working for SS Wilson Associates for the past about 8 years now, and I've been representing or working with the developer on this project for the last, I think, starting from 2019. So we completed the noise study and keeping in mind that you have noise issues in the area. And in the past, like I've worked on many quarries in the past in the Bruce Peninsula and other areas in Ontario where we modeled quarries, and you have receptors really close to these really noisy quarries. So
Mr. Assad, I'd just like to stop you right there. I'm sure the panel will likely have some questions for you with respect to that study. I don't want to get into your particulars at this point in time, but I'd like to discuss with the panel what their thoughts are. To that end, I'd like to ask Ms. Chandler if you have any questions or comments, concerns.
I do have several to start. Just a few points of clarification. I know there was an email and reference to an email from the pit owner adjacent where he comments on the severance application and asks for a notice to be put on title. What was his comment on the minor variance application when you asked him with a property 40 meters from the boundary?
Yeah, so in discussion with the owner, we understand that Frank Argue is aware of the application. He would have been circulated on the variance. No question that he was mostly involved, I would say, during the consent process when he asked that a noise warning clause be registered on title. I don't know that he has any specific comments with respect to the location of the proposed dwelling. That's the subject of this particular variance application.
Did you, I'm sorry to ask, but did you seek him out? This is pretty critical to his business in terms of a decision made here. Like,
hi there, it's Mark Steenbeker's piping in. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, yeah, I have been in touch with the Argue family and we have discussed the minor variance, and they are of the same mind. As long as the original notice on title is there, they have no problems with what's been approved and or what we're requesting for relief for with the minor variance. So I've definitely been in discussions with them and there's no issues. Okay.
Thank you. So I have a number of questions about the noise study. Unless I'm mistaken, we haven't actually seen a copy of it, the committee members, unless I couldn't find it. Maybe if you could put back up on the screen a shot from it that shows the noise contours and what they were modeled from. Is that possible?
Sure, I can bring up the noise contours, or do you want to see, Ben, do you want to show them the noise study, or should I pull it up on my screen and you can share it?
I don't think we can. It would have had to be submitted.
Well, the noise study, there's no question the noise study was submitted, but staff, I believe, are just in the process of bringing this up. This would be, I believe, slide 12, and I don't know which number that is in the committee's slide.
I think it's page 6 maybe.
Keep another couple slides. Should be the next one. And oh, my apologies, it's we're getting ahead. Back a couple. One more. Here we go.
So if I'm correct, the noise contours, that's what I'm looking at, right? Were drawn from the existing operation layout?
Incorrect. There's no existing operation. So the property was used 20 years, and I'm not saying incorrect in an accusatory way, just for clarification. The property hasn't been used for about 20 years, just for stockpiling of material. So like the quote unquote facility at on the Walton lands opposite Fallowfield, Assad and his team have had to come up with assumptions with respect to where a batching plant might go if they pursued ECA approval and got ECA approval to locate a batching plant on the subject lands. Similarly, they make assumptions about the location of trucks idling and whatnot on.
Can you go back up north to the Argue Lands Coordinator? So there's a site plan associated with this, and it shows a cement batching plant on it as well. Where is that denoted on this?
It's within the work cell. The batching plant is kind of the northeastern quartile of the work area cell.
All right, so this was done based on the site plan that is approved by MNRF.
Well, the site plan that was approved by MNR, and I discussed this with folks who worked in aggregates for decades, for the better parts of their careers at McIntosh Perry. The site plan does include a batching plant, but there's no question that any new proposal, there hasn't been a batching plant on the subject lands, any proposal for a batching plant would be looked at as a new proposal that would require an ECA. So the actual eventual location of the batching plant would, if I was working on these approvals, would probably go at a location on the property where the noise impact on adjacent properties is minimum.
So you're kind of getting to where my concern is.
Yeah.
For an operator on an aggregate site to make any changes, like if Mr. Argue starts running again, he now becomes responsible for managing his operation around all the sensitive uses that are established around them. He's got a school on the north. He's got residential properties on his east side. Can't remember what's on the south. And now we're tucking up a residential use 40 meters away. So from the edge of the extraction, 55 meters away from his limit of extraction.
Yes.
The responsibility is being handed back to the quarry operator to work around this proposal, this residence.
Well, to some extent, however, in the event that Mr. Argue has looked at this particular noise study, they should actually take some comfort in the fact that the study identifies based on operations of from 7 to 7 of the batching plant, 40 hours per 60 minutes of the day, that it can occur in relation to the proposed dwelling. So the investigation into the feasibility of locating the batching plant here with respect to this sensitive land use has already been preliminarily explored. And that's the requirement under the official plan and PPS. We're showing a very active site here where one has not been active for many years. I'm not suggesting that it's unlikely that it will ever be active again in the future. And the noise study contemplates full activity here. So that's what we have analyzed in order to investigate whether or not there's conflict.
Okay, I'm for the moment, I'm going to just hold my questions.
Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
2 questions. Number 1, there was a berm on it one time. What happened? Where did it go?
Assad, do you mind taking that question?
So initially when we started working on the project, we didn't have really detailed topography of the land, and later on we were provided with photos from the client and more details of the topography where it shows there is a natural berm, existing berm. So we modeled, by using the actual topography, we modeled that into our program. Initially, the berm was placed there on purpose to show that there is an existing berm of some sort, but later on, when we got the detailed topography, we were able to remove the berm by using the natural topography and calculate the sound levels at the closest receptor.
Okay, the other question I got is the noise study. I don't know anything about noise studies, but it seems to me you guys did a noise study that in your mind seems to work, and in the city's mind it doesn't work. Why are we apart there? Like, just very basic. Does the city consider this noise study to rate a 6 out of 10? It needs to be a 7.5, or why does the noise study not work into the city's plan?
Ms. Turkington?
Through you, Mr. Chair, city staff have reviewed the noise study and the updated noise study and are not in agreement with the findings or the conclusions of the noise study.
That's
be more
where I'm
specific?
confused. So is the noise study no good, or is it not done right, or what's the problem with the noise study?
So staff's written comments on file address the noise study, and the noise study was reviewed by engineering staff at the city, and we do not agree with the findings.
Okay, thank you.
If I can weigh in here, there's nothing within the staff report I can see that they through you, Mr. Chair, they do make an identification that the berm no longer exists. They identify that without there's no extensive rationale for why it is not there, despite a discussion within the noise study. There's no discussion on the noise limits, the decibel levels, NPC 300 requirements. There's nothing in this regard that I can see.
Thank you. Ms. Turkington, I'm curious, 20 years ago, this pit was in full operation, I think we heard, and the residential neighborhood on Kilminey Drive was built in the 1990s, so 10 years of working with that mineral extraction operation at full go, as well as a middle school. Have you any information on whether or not there has been any complaints with respect to noise from those two communities?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any noise complaints. That would be something that would go to enforcement and inspections, and that is not something I would necessarily be looped into.
Okay. I'll go to Mr. Vervoort. Any questions or comments, Mr. Vervoort?
Just a question for the applicant. So when we went through this the first time and granted the consent, then presumably a building envelope was identified. Is it not possible to comply with the setbacks? Like, why are we moving the house, I guess, because that issue really hasn't been addressed.
Yeah, so what I can suggest is the way it was laid out. We were very open that there'd be a minor variance here at some point. The way it was set up, it means that that land, let's say it was not to be developed, it was for a single-use residence, it would have to have like a 1,500-foot long driveway into the back, bring hydro into the back. It's just an extreme expense for something that doesn't need to make any sense. So.
And if I can add to that, it is confusing through you, Mr. Chair, that that there's a development envelope identified on the lot development plan. There's no question about that, and we've spoken with staff a fair bit. The challenge we have is when the lot development plan was initially mentioned, We actually didn't want it to apply to the retained lands because there weren't details for what was going to be proposed on the retained lands. That being said, we understood that staff and committee members needed to understand whether or not there was development potential. So we proceeded and we said, okay, we'll show you a very small envelope at the back of the property that identifies potential. But we were clear on a number of documented occasions that it wasn't actually the intent, and that variances would be pursued in the future. We didn't get too specific, but the noise study, the preliminary noise study that was provided for a purpose, and it was to indicate that it's possible they'd be pursuing, our client would be pursuing a dwelling where one is currently being pursued. In hindsight, we would have liked to have had those conversations in a more formal way and probably even more documented, but that's not the case.
I would like to add a couple more points here. The first point is the more, if you're going to move the house further away from the east, you will be exposed to more noise, because right now the existing berm is very effective. The further you're going to go away from the berm, it will be ineffective and you will have higher sound levels. Secondly, when you are close to the Fellowfield Road, it's a better thing because the further you're going to go away, you will be less exposed to the noise from the road. So the criteria right now, it's actually in the favor, because when you're closer to the road, you're exposed to the ambient noise, which becomes like your criteria. For our study, we use the MECP exclusion limits, which are very conservative, being 50 dBA at the building facade. When you have the quarry operating, think about how many trucks will be going into the quarry and coming out of the quarry. Once they come out of the quarry, they're going to go on the Fellowfield Road. It's going to increase the ambient sound levels. So you have to keep that in mind, that the ambient will go up likely from the ambient of the trucks. So that's another thing that's not modeled. If we try to be as conservative as possible to come up with values that are more conservative than the actual life. So these are the 2 points. If you have any comments, I would love to answer those.
Thank you. Mr. Revort, would you like to continue?
No, that's it. That's the question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Otto, any further comments? Questions?
No, I think I'm confused enough as it is. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm getting the feeling that we should probably reserve this judgment and then return back with as a group and discuss it ourselves. And if everybody is if all the panel is in agreement, I'd like to propose that we reserve on this particular application. All in favor? So we'll reserve, and you will be able to get our answer later on today if you want to call staff. Mr. Clare.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll now proceed to application numbers 11 and 12. And I believe we're looking for Mr. Howard James. Need to unmute your microphone. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Thank you, Mr. James.
Good. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to administer the oath for the statutory declaration at this time, if that's all right.
Yep.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please, I think we're kind of know where we're at with this one. We were doing this not long ago, but if you want to give a very brief description of your application, we can address that.
Absolutely. I have a few slides here. I'll be fairly quick with them. If we could go to slide number 1 and 2. Here we are. So you can see on the left-hand side is you can see part 1 and part 2 of a lot. Part 1 is my proposed severance away from the main lot. You can see the existing dwelling there. We talked about this the last time we met, and as far as I could glean from the meeting, the minor variances, etc., were agreed upon, except that we had the sticking point of a waterway at the back of the property. And that was deemed to be a water course. And because of that, and the limitations that came with that, there was going to be problems with putting a dwelling in that Part 1 lot. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So these are the minor variances that we discussed last time. So we're going to a setback of 5 meters from the required 7.5, and an 18% coverage by the dwelling from a normal maximum of 15%. If we can move on to the next slide, please. And so this was the sticking point, that there was a water course behind, and it brought with it various minimum distances of 15 meters, etc. But since then, since we had the adjournment, that water course has been redesignated as a water swale. That water swale brings with it different requirements. I believe that requirement is 3 meters, but we could look into the details of that. And the reference I give here is I was talking to Mr. Walker, and he sent me an email confirming the redesignation on the 3rd of September. And so hopefully, with it now being redesignated as a water swale, it's now perfectly feasible to build a dwelling should that land be severed. And so hopefully we can move forward from there.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Walker, can you please comment on this application?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has reviewed the proposal and continues to have no concerns with it. And as it relates to the water feature that's on the adjacent property, the city's natural system team has looked into it and has this, and they have confirmed that it is a drainage swale and not a water course, and as such, there would not be a variance that's required from it.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Mr. Revort?
None with respect to either application.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler? Any
None.
questions or comments? Okay, Mr. Otto?
Yes, the only one I have is about the water. Wouldn't that be under the conservation authorities? And I believe anything that retains water is considered a water course under their definitions.
Doesn't retain water.
Mr. Chair, the variance is required from, to the variance that would have been required if it was considered a water course would be to vary the zoning bylaw, which falls under the city. The water course isn't within the Conservation Authority's regulation limits, but I believe the MBCA can speak more to that.
To that end, Ms. Ogden, can you comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the Conservation Authority's regulation, we have a text-based definition for a water course. And through my site inspection, this does meet the Conservation Authority's definition of a water course, which means that any alterations to the water course itself would require written permission from the Conservation Authority in advance of doing any works. However, in regards to the zoning bylaw, the Conservation Authority is in agreement with Mr. Walker's comments with regards to the minor variance not being required from that water course.
Anything further, Mr. Otto?
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Chandler, any questions or comments? Or did I get you already? Okay. Mr. Lewis?
I'm good with it.
Comments? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. James, are you familiar with the conditions that are being asked to be imposed on this application?
I'm aware of other requirements, should you approve it now, that will need to be met, like the payment of water frontage and in lieu of park, that kind of thing.
Okay, those are the items that I'm talking about. There are 4 of them.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So if there are no further comments, I'd like to ask for approval of this application. All in favor?
And that's, just to be clear, Mr. Chair, that's the consent application and minor variance application.
Yes, it's for application number 11 and 12.
Thank you.
Your application is approved, Mr. James. Thanks for
Thank you
your
very much.
patience.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye now. So I guess, Madam Coordinator, can you set up another Zoom call for the panel to discuss the application we reserved? So we'll sign off now.
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna log off and we'll set up a separate meeting for the reserve item.
Thank you very much.
I see one here. It just came up in my computer at noon. We can't get on until noon. It just came up in my email.
We'll get on before that. I had to put noon in as a default, but we can log in anytime now. I'll start it
Perfect.
now.
Thank you.